Isabel had always considered herself a creature of routine. At 28, she was living a life most people would envy. A stable job at a local marketing agency, a reliable boyfriend, and a cozy apartment in the small, peaceful town of Harrisonville. Life here moved slowly, and Isabel liked it that way. There was comfort in predictability, in knowing what each day would bring. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there had to be more. More than the steady job that left her creatively stifled, more than the quiet town that felt both too small and too safe. Her job as a graphic designer was something she had fallen into right after college. At first, it was exciting, designing logos, creating advertisements, and contributing to various marketing campaigns. But as the years went by, it had become repetitive. The same projects, the same deadlines, the same clients. Isabel longed for something more, something that would ignite her passion the way her college art classes had once done. Yet she never had the courage to break free, to chase something larger than the life she had built. Even her relationship with Mark, her boyfriend of 4 years, felt like it had hit a plateau. Mark was a good man, steady, dependable, kind. But he was practical, cautious, and their connection had started to feel more like a partnership of convenience than anything passionate. They had settled into a routine too, spending evenings watching TV, going on the occasional dinner date, and discussing their plans for the future. Isabel loved him, but she couldn't ignore the growing realization that she was missing something important. It was late one Tuesday evening when everything began to shift. Isabel had just finished a long day of work, exhausted and uninspired, when she found a letter waiting for her in the mailbox. She almost tossed it aside, assuming it was just another bill or advertisement. But something about the envelope caught her eye, the elegant script on the front, the foreign postage. Curiosity piqued, she tore it open. Inside was an invitation. No, an opportunity she had only dreamed about. La Maison d'Artistes, a prestigious art residency in Paris, was offering her a chance to apply for a year-long program. The residency was renowned, attracting talented artists from around the world. Participants were given the freedom to focus on their own projects while immersed in the creative culture of Paris. It was everything Isabel had ever wanted. Her heart raced as she read the details, her mind buzzing with excitement and disbelief. A year in Paris? Surrounded by art, culture, and endless possibilities? It felt like a dream. But there was a catch: she had to apply. And there was no guarantee that she would be accepted. Still, the idea of it was tantalizing. Could this be the escape she had been yearning for? The thought of leaving Harrisonville, of walking away from everything she had known, was terrifying. Her life here was safe, predictable. She had a job, a boyfriend, and a place to call home. But Isabel couldn't ignore the stirring inside her, the restless desire to break free from the confines of her comfort zone. She had never been the type to take risks, but the idea of living in Paris, of pursuing her passion for art without the distractions of everyday life, was too alluring to pass up. That night, as Isabel sat on her couch, the letter in her lap, she wrestled with the decision. She talked it over with her best friend, Emma, who had always been the more adventurous of the two. Emma had moved across the country after college, chasing her own dreams of entrepreneurship and adventure. Emma was supportive, encouraging Isabel to apply, reminding her that life was short and she would regret it forever if she didn't take the chance. "You need this, Isabel," Emma said over the phone. "This could be the adventure you've been waiting for." But Isabel couldn't shake the thought of Mark. She loved him, but the idea of leaving him behind made her feel guilty. Mark was supportive, of course, but he didn't seem as excited about the opportunity. "You should go for it if that's what you want," he said when Isabel mentioned it, but his tone lacked the passion she had hoped for. There was something in his words that made her feel like it wasn't really a big deal for him. She wanted him to be as enthusiastic about her dreams as Emma was. The next few days were filled with internal conflict. Isabel spent hours thinking about the residency, about what her life would be like if she left Harrisonville. She dreamed of waking up every day in a city that had inspired artists for centuries, of immersing herself in the culture, of creating art without the distractions of a job she had grown to resent. But could she really leave everything behind? Her job, her apartment, her relationship? One evening, after a particularly draining day at work, Isabel made up her mind. She couldn't keep putting off her dreams. She filled out the application for La Maison d'Artistes, carefully choosing the artwork she would submit and writing a personal statement about why she felt Paris was the place where she could truly unlock her potential. It was terrifying, but exhilarating at the same time. She knew that applying didn't guarantee acceptance, but it felt like a step in the right direction, a step toward a life she had only ever imagined. After submitting her application, Isabel sat back and stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had made the decision. She had taken the first step towards something new, something unknown. There was no turning back now. As she closed her laptop and stood up to make dinner, Isabel couldn't help but feel a wave of excitement wash over her. This was just the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive. Did I end the days following Isabel's decision? An uneasiness lingered in the pit of her stomach. The reality of what she had done, a small, seemingly innocent click of the submit button, felt monumental. She was no longer standing still. She had set something in motion that she couldn't control, and it terrified her. For the first time, she felt like she was stepping off the edge of a cliff, not knowing what lay below. Isabel's life in Harrisonville began to feel even smaller, more confined. Each morning, she woke up and went through the motions, preparing breakfast in her quiet apartment, getting dressed for work, and walking the familiar streets of the town. But her thoughts were elsewhere, consumed by the possibility of something much larger and more vibrant than the life she knew. She had spent years dreaming of escaping, of finding something bigger than herself. And now, the chance was within her grasp. But even as she felt the excitement of the potential ahead, she couldn't ignore the growing tension between her and Mark. The weight of her decision began to press down on their relationship. Mark, to his credit, was supportive, but there was a noticeable distance between them that Isabel couldn't quite place. It wasn't that he was angry or upset. He was calm, as always, but Isabel sensed a quiet disappointment. Or maybe it was fear. Perhaps, in his own way, Mark was scared of change, scared of losing her, scared of the uncertainty that Isabel's leap into the unknown would bring. She tried not to let it bother her, but it was impossible to ignore. One evening, after a quiet dinner together, Isabel broached the subject with Mark. "Do you ever wonder if I don't know, too comfortable?" she asked, her voice hesitant. She had been turning the thought over in her mind for weeks, but had never found the right moment to bring it up. Now, with the decision to go to Paris hanging over her, the words tumbled out before she could stop them. Mark looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing slightly. "Comfortable?" he repeated, as if he hadn't quite understood the question. "I don't think that's a bad thing, We've got a good life here. We're stable." Isabel didn't reply immediately. She was grateful for the stability they had built together, but it felt like a life in stasis, a life that was too safe. "I just feel like I'm stuck," she finally said. "I don't want to be stuck anymore, Mark. I want to do something bigger." Mark placed his fork down gently, meeting her gaze. "Isabel, I want you to be happy. But do you think that leaving everything behind for a year is the answer? You could be happy here too with me." Isabel swallowed, her throat tightening. The truth was, she wasn't sure if she could be happy staying in Harrisonville. But she also didn't want to leave Mark behind. She loved him. The thought of being without him was painful, but the thought of living without ever fully pursuing her dreams seemed even worse. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I need to try. For me. I have to do this." Mark didn't say anything for a long while, and Isabel could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft. "I'll support you, but I'm not sure I can be the one to hold you back from what you want." That night, as Isabel lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was breaking. She had never wanted to leave Mark behind, but in chasing her own dreams, she might be doing just that. She closed her eyes, willing herself to quiet the storm in her mind, but sleep eluded her. The next few weeks felt like a blur of uncertainty. Isabel's routine continued, but every day was overshadowed by the waiting game. She couldn't help but obsess over the residency application. She checked her emails several times a day, her heart skipping a beat each time a new message appeared in her inbox. But no response came. Then, one afternoon, after returning from a meeting at work, she found an email from La Maison d'Artistes sitting in her inbox. Her heart raced as she clicked it open. "Congratulations, Isabel. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the residency program. We believe your work has great potential, and we look forward to seeing how your time in Paris will inspire your creativity." Isabel could hardly believe it. The email was short, but the words were everything she had hoped for. The residency had accepted her. She was going to Paris. She felt a rush of excitement flood through her, followed by a knot of panic. This was real now. This wasn't just a dream or a fantasy. It was happening. She was about to leave her life in Harrisonville behind, and though it was terrifying, it was also exhilarating. Isabel picked up the phone and called Emma first. Her voice cracked with emotion as she told her best friend the news. Emma was overjoyed, her excitement palpable through the phone. "I knew you could do it. You're going to thrive, Isabel. Paris is going to change your life." That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she was going to tell Mark. The conversation was inevitable, and she knew it would be a turning point in their relationship. When they sat down to talk later that week, Isabel could see the uncertainty on Mark's face even before she told him. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for the words that had been brewing in her mind for days. "I got in, Mark. I'm going to Paris." There was a pause. Mark's face softened, but there was no immediate excitement in his eyes, no spark of enthusiasm. Instead, he simply nodded. "That's amazing, Isabel. I'm proud of you." But Isabel could sense that something had shifted between them. The excitement she had hoped to share with him wasn't there. Instead, there was an uncomfortable silence. Isabel realized, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, that no matter how much she wanted this to be a happy moment, it wasn't. She was about to step into a new life, a life without Mark, and she wasn't sure how to reconcile that with the love she still felt for him. But there was no turning back now. Isabel had made her decision, and while the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. She was going to Paris. The weeks leading up to Isabel's departure passed in a haze of preparation, anxiety, and bittersweet goodbyes. Every moment felt heavy with the weight of change. Each interaction with Mark, each walk through the familiar streets of Harrisonville, each morning she woke up in her apartment knowing she would soon leave it all behind. Her heart ached with the realization that this chapter of her life was closing. She had dreamed of this, of something bigger, of breaking free from the comfortable, predictable life she had built. But now that it was happening, she found herself mourning the very things she had once longed to escape. Mark had become distant. He still answered her calls, still met her for dinner, still told her he loved her. But it felt different now, like they were holding on to something already slipping through their fingers. Isabel wanted to believe that they could make it work, that their love could withstand the distance. But deep down, she knew the truth. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, eating dinner in silence, Isabel finally voiced the words they had both been avoiding. "What are we doing, Mark?" she asked softly. Mark set his fork down and sighed. "I don't know, Is. I want to be supportive. I want you to chase your dreams. But I can't ignore the fact that you're leaving. And I don't think either of us really knows what that means for us." Isabel's throat tightened. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. Mark reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I don't want to lose you either. But I also don't want to hold you back." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken truths filling the air. Isabel wanted to believe that love was enough, that they could survive this. But love wasn't always enough. She had made her choice, and it was taking her away from him. That night, Mark stayed over, and they held each other in bed as if trying to preserve something that was already slipping away. Neither of them spoke of what came next. They didn't need to. 2 days later, Mark kissed her goodbye and walked away, leaving Isabel standing alone on her apartment doorstep. She watched him go, her heart breaking even though she had known this moment was inevitable. It was over. With Mark gone, Isabel poured herself into preparations for Paris. She packed her belongings, sold off the furniture she no longer needed, and said goodbye to the little apartment that had been her safe haven for years. Emma visited one last time before Isabel's departure, helping her sort through her things. "I still can't believe you're actually doing this," Emma said, folding one of Isabel's sweaters. "It's like watching my best friend turn into this fearless adventurer." Isabel laughed, though the sound was tinged with nerves. "I don't feel fearless," she admitted. "I feel like I'm about to jump off a cliff." Emma grinned. "Yeah, but the best things in life happen when you jump." As they packed, Isabel found old sketches she had done in college, reminders of the passion that had once burned so brightly inside her. Somewhere along the way, that passion had dulled, buried beneath the weight of responsibility, routine, and practicality. Paris was her chance to reignite it. When the last of her things were packed, Emma hugged her tightly. "This isn't goodbye forever," she said. "You're going to come back an even better version of yourself." Isabel clung to those words, holding them close as she boarded her flight the next morning. The moment Isabel stepped off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, a wave of emotions crashed over her: excitement, fear, exhilaration, uncertainty. She was really here. Paris was unlike anything she had ever known. The air smelled of freshly baked bread and rain-soaked cobblestone. The city was alive in a way Harrisonville had never been. Bustling, chaotic, yet breathtakingly beautiful. She took a taxi to the address given to her by La Maison d'Artistes, the art residency that had given her this opportunity. The building was nestled in the heart of Montmartre, an old-world part of the city filled with charm and history. When she arrived, she was greeted by Madame Levesque, the program's director, an older woman with a sharp eye and an air of quiet authority. "Bienvenue, Isabelle," Madame Levesque said in a thick French accent. "We are happy to have you." Isabelle followed her inside, taking in the high ceilings, the grand windows that let in the soft Parisian light, and the scent of oil paints lingering in the air. She was given a small studio apartment, modest but perfect. It had a balcony that overlooked the streets of Montmartre, where artists painted on sidewalks and music drifted from nearby cafes. This was her new home. The first night, Isabelle met the other artists in the program. There was Lena, a German sculptor with fiery red hair and an even fierier personality; Matteo, an Italian painter who spoke as passionately about food as he did about art; and Ethan, a quiet but intriguing American photographer who had an air of mystery about him. They welcomed her warmly, eager to share their experiences and struggles. For the first time in a long time, Isabelle felt like she was surrounded by people who understood her. They, too, had left behind comfort and familiarity in pursuit of something greater. That night, as she sat on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Isabelle felt a strange mix of emotions: loss, excitement, fear, hope. She had given up so much to be here. Now she had to prove to herself that it had been worth it. The next morning, Isabelle stood in her new art studio, a blank canvas before her. She hadn't painted in months, maybe even years. Her hands trembled as she picked up the brush. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she made a mistake? Had she thrown away everything, her relationship, her stable life, for something she wasn't even sure she could do anymore? Then, taking a deep breath, she dipped the brush into the paint and made the first stroke. It was shaky at first, uncertain. But as the colors spread across the canvas, something inside her came alive again. She was home. Isabelle's days in Paris quickly fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent wandering the streets, afternoons in the studio, evenings sketching on her balcony as the city hummed around her. But despite the beauty surrounding her, something was missing. She had imagined Paris would instantly inspire her, that the moment she arrived, she would feel a surge of creativity and passion. But instead, she found herself staring at blank canvases, unable to begin. The other artists in the residency seemed to flow effortlessly. Lena sculpting marble like it was soft as clay, Matteo painting rich, vibrant landscapes, Ethan capturing the city through his camera lens with an almost poetic precision. They made it look easy. But for Isabel? It wasn't easy. Every time she lifted her brush, doubt crept in. Was she even good enough to be here? Had she left behind everything, Mark, her home, her life, only to fail? The fear paralyzed her point one evening. Desperate for a distraction, Isabel took a walk through the streets of Montmartre. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh bread and espresso. She wandered aimlessly, passing cafes where artists sketched portraits of tourists, their charcoal strokes swift and confident. She envied them, the way they could create without hesitation, without fear. She used to be like that. Lost in thought, she found herself standing in front of a small art gallery. Its windows were filled with paintings, each one bursting with life and color. On a whim, she stepped inside. The gallery owner, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, greeted her warmly. "You look like someone searching for something," she said with a knowing smile. Isabel hesitated, then nodded. "I think I am." The woman led her to a particular painting, a self-portrait of a young woman. It wasn't perfectly realistic. Instead, it was raw, emotional, full of movement. The brushstrokes were wild, unrestrained. "She painted this during the hardest time of her life," the woman explained. "When she felt lost. Creating it helped her find herself again." Isabel swallowed hard, the words hitting her like a punch to the gut. That night, back in her apartment, she stood in front of her own blank canvas. She thought about the girl in the painting, the girl who painted through her pain. Then slowly, she picked up her brush. And this time, she didn't hesitate. The next morning, Isabel was in the studio early, working on a painting unlike anything she had ever done before. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Ethan, the photographer, stopped by her workspace, watching quietly. "This is different from what I've seen you do before," he said. She glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "I guess I stopped thinking about what I was supposed to paint, and just painted." Ethan nodded approvingly. That's when the best art happens. For the first time, Isabel saw understanding in his eyes. Ethan wasn't like the others. He wasn't loud or boastful about his work. But there was something in the way he spoke about art that made her feel seen. "Do you want to grab a coffee later?" he asked casually. Isabel hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." A week later, Isabel received an email from Mark. Her heart pounded as she opened it. "Isabel, I hope Paris is everything you dreamed it would be. I won't lie, it's been hard not having you here. But I know you needed this. And I hope you're finding what you were looking for. No matter what happens, I want you to know I'm proud of you. Mark." Tears pricked at Isabel's eyes. She had expected anger, bitterness, maybe even regret. But instead, Mark's words were full of understanding and support. He still cared. But was that enough to bring her back? She didn't have an answer yet. That evening, Isabel met Ethan for coffee at a small cafe tucked away from the tourist crowds. The conversation flowed effortlessly, about art, about life, about the things they had left behind. "I was engaged once," Ethan admitted, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Isabel's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Really?" He nodded. "She wanted something different than I did. I thought love was enough, but sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go." Isabel looked down at her cup, his words hitting closer to home than she cared to admit. "I think I'm still figuring that out," she murmured. Ethan studied her for a moment. "Then take your time. Paris isn't just a place, it's a lesson. Let it teach you." And for the first time since she had arrived, Isabel felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The days in Paris began to blur together in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. Isabel had found a rhythm, but was she truly moving forward, or just drifting? Her paintings were improving. The fear that had once gripped her every time she picked up a brush was slowly fading. She was painting more freely now, with bold strokes and unfiltered emotion. Each piece felt more like her than anything she had ever created before. Yet, despite her artistic growth, there was a lingering emptiness. Late at night, when the city quieted and she sat alone in her apartment, her thoughts drifted back to Mark. His email had opened a wound she hadn't realized was still raw. She hadn't written back. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what to say. Was she supposed to tell him she missed him? That she sometimes lay awake at night wondering if she had made a mistake? That even though she had dreamed of Paris for years, some part of her heart still belonged to him? Or was she supposed to let him go completely? One morning, Madame Levesque surprised the artists with an invitation to a countryside retreat, a weekend trip to Giverny, the home of Monet's famous gardens. "This will be a chance to reconnect with nature," she announced. "To see the world through fresh eyes." Isabel hesitated, but Ethan nudged her. "You should come," he said. "You need a break from that tiny studio of yours." So she agreed. The next day, she found herself in a train headed toward the picturesque countryside, watching the city disappear behind her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of freedom. When they arrived in Giverny, Isabel was overwhelmed by the beauty. The gardens were alive with color, lush greens, soft pinks, vibrant yellows. The famous water lilies floated on the pond, exactly as Monet had painted them. It was the first time since arriving in Paris that she had felt truly at peace. "You're smiling," Ethan observed as they walked through the gardens. "I guess I am," Isabel admitted. "Feels good, doesn't it? he said with a smirk. She rolled her eyes but couldn't deny the truth in his words. That night, the artists gathered around a bonfire, sipping wine and sharing stories. Laughter filled the air, mixing with the scent of burning wood and the distant sound of crickets. As the others slowly wandered off to their rooms, Ethan and Isabel remained behind. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. Then Ethan spoke. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you?" Isabel looked at him, startled. "Who?" Ethan gave her a knowing look. "Mark," she sighed, staring into the fire. "I don't know how to stop." "You don't have to," Ethan said. "Loving someone doesn't mean you have to be with them. And letting go doesn't mean forgetting." Isabel swallowed hard. "Then what does it mean?" Ethan leaned back, gazing up at the stars. "It means making peace with the fact that love isn't always meant to last forever." The words settled deep in her chest, both painful and liberating. She wasn't sure she was ready to accept them. But maybe she was ready to try. The next morning, inspired by the beauty around her, Isabel set up her easel and began to paint. But this time, she didn't try to control it. She let the brush move freely, capturing the colors of the garden, the warmth of the sunlight, the emotions swirling inside her. The painting wasn't just about Monet's gardens. It was about change. Growth. Letting go. When she stepped back, breathless, Ethan appeared beside her. "It's your best one yet," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Isabel believed it. That evening, back in her room, Isabel opened her laptop and stared at the blank email draft she had been avoiding. To Mark. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She could write to him. She could tell him she missed him. She could tell him about the gardens, about Ethan, about how Paris was changing her. Or she could say nothing at all. She closed her laptop. For now, she would let time do what it needed to. Back in Paris, something had shifted inside Isabel. She no longer felt like an outsider watching the world move around her. She was part of it now, part of the city, part of the art, part of the story she was writing for herself. Her paintings were no longer hesitant. They were bold, filled with emotion and color. Each stroke of her brush felt like a step forward, a step away from the past. But no matter how much she painted, one thing still lingered. Mark. She had left his email unanswered, and yet his presence remained, woven into the spaces between her thoughts. Would she ever be able to move on if she didn't face him? One afternoon, while sketching at a cafe near the Seine, Isabel's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I'm in Paris. Can we talk?" Her breath caught in her throat. She knew who it was before she even finished reading. Mark. She hesitated, fingers frozen over the screen. She could ignore him. She could pretend the message had never come, continue living in the delicate balance she had created for herself here. Or she could face him. Her heart pounded as she typed a reply. "Where are you?" They met at a quiet spot along the river, just as the sun was beginning to set, casting golden light over the water. When Isabel saw him, it was like seeing a ghost of the life she had left behind. Mark looked the same, his dark hair slightly messy, his brown eyes warm but cautious. And yet, something was different. There was a quiet sadness in the way he stood, a hesitation in his smile. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then Mark broke the silence. "You look different," he said. Isabel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So do you." Mark smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've missed you," he admitted. Isabel's chest tightened. "Mark." "I know," he interrupted. "I know things are different now. I needed to see you." She swallowed hard. "Why?" Mark exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I had to know if you were happy." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Was she? She had found a piece of herself in Paris. She had grown. Changed. But happiness, that was harder to define. She thought about the nights spent painting until dawn, the laughter shared with Ethan, the feeling of standing in Monet's garden and realizing she was finally beginning to heal. And then she thought about Mark, the life they had built, the love they had shared. Could she ever truly be happy without him? She looked up at him, searching for the right words. "I'm still figuring that out," she admitted. Mark nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "I won't ask you to come back," he said quietly. "I just needed to know if I should let you go." Isabel's heart ached. This was it. The moment they both had been avoiding. Maybe in another life, they would have made it work. Maybe in another time, she would have chosen differently. But in this life, in this moment, she reached out, taking his hand one last time. "You should," she whispered. Mark's fingers tightened around hers for just a second before he slowly let go. And then, just like that, he walked away. That night, Isabel sat on her balcony, staring at the city lights below. She had done the hardest thing she had ever done. She had said goodbye. And now, there was nothing left to do but move forward. For the first time since arriving in Paris, she felt truly free. The morning after Mark left, Isabel woke up to the sound of rain tapping against her window. Paris looked different, softer, quieter. Or maybe it wasn't Paris that had changed. Maybe it was her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She had let go of Mark. She had let go of the past. And now, for the first time, she could truly think about what came next. A week later, Madame Levesque gathered all the artists in the studio. "I have exciting news," she announced. "Our gallery exhibition is set for next month." The room buzzed with excitement. For most of them, This would be their first time showcasing their work to the world. Isabel felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. A few months ago, the idea of putting her art on display would have terrified her. Now it thrilled her. She had something to say with her art. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to say it. The days passed. Isabel found herself growing closer to Ethan. It wasn't something she had planned. It wasn't something she had even expected. But he was there. Always. Encouraging her. Challenging her. Making her laugh when she felt like she had nothing left to give. One night, after a long evening of painting in the studio, they walked back through the empty Paris streets. The air was crisp, the scent of rain still lingering from earlier in the evening. "You've changed," Ethan said, glancing at her. Isabel smiled. "Yeah," he nodded. "The girl who came here months ago wouldn't even show her sketches to me. And now you're about to put your paintings in an exhibition." She shrugged. "Maybe I just needed the right place to grow." Ethan studied her for a moment. "Or maybe you just needed to realize you were strong enough all along." Something warm flickered inside her chest. For the first time, she wondered if this quiet, steady presence beside her, was something more than friendship. The gallery was packed. Artists, critics, and strangers roamed the space, pausing in front of paintings, sipping wine, whispering among themselves. Isabel stood near the edge of the room, heart pounding as she watched people stop in front of her paintings. Her paintings. She had poured her soul into them. One was of a stormy sea, filled with wild, untamed waves. One was of a Paris street at dawn, a single figure walking into the light. And the last, the most personal, was of a woman standing at a crossroads, half in shadow, half in light. A man with silver hair and glasses approached her. "Your work is raw. Emotional. There's something truly special here." Isabel's throat tightened. "Thank you." The man handed her a business card. "I'd like to feature your work in another exhibition next season." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. This was it. The beginning of something real. Later that night, as the exhibition wound down, Isabel stepped outside for fresh air. Ethan followed her, hands in his pockets. "You did it," he said. She nodded. "I did." They stood in silence for a moment, the city stretching out before them. Then, without thinking, Isabel turned to him. And in that moment, she realized something. She was no longer afraid. Of showing her art. Of chasing her dreams. Of opening her heart again. So she did. She took a step forward and kissed him. Ethan froze for a second, then smiled against her lips. "Took you long enough," he murmured. She laughed, feeling lighter than she ever had before. Because this was not the end. It was just the beginning.